right, welcome back to the podcast. We are off the wire. I'm Tanner and I'm joined by Anthony. Do you ever get the feeling that users are installing programs or running programs or purchasing devices that you don't know about? I know I've had that feeling, and I'm sure Anthony has too. And the reason we've had that feeling is because it's absolutely true. This is something that goes on in almost every environment. I mean, it's called shadow IT. So we're going to talk about that tonight, kind of break it down, give you some tips and tricks on how you can combat this and protect against it. But before we jump in, if you're not subscribed to us already, please subscribe in whatever platform you're listening or watching us on. And if you find something valuable that we're talking about tonight, share it with someone, in your network of friends or colleagues and help the show grow. It's really helpful to us to have people share the episode. So, Anthony, I think as we get started here, I think most people know what shadow IT is, but maybe there's like five people out there that aren't sure. So, in your words, what do you consider shadow IT? If there's like a definition, what would you give it?
Yeah, really the main thing that I think of is where people are either using unauthorized software or even have subscription services to software to like cloud-based software or running hardware that isn't provided by the IT department or isn't authorized by the IT department. I'm sure there's other facets to that, but that's really the main thing that comes to mind with shadow IT.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I really don't have a thing to add. I think you covered it pretty well. Have you like do you have some concrete examples from your past, maybe where you're working now or in the past of like users that have done this and so maybe to give an example of like something that you've personally experienced that's considered shadow IT?
So yeah, the one example, and I really was pretty aggravated by it. I probably should not have been. It was just someone using Sign Up Genius, and I think that's really it's benign. But I was like, why aren't they using FormStack? We've got FormStack. It's so easy to use. We could have gathered all this information, and with Sign Up Genius, like you got to create your own login and stuff like that. And I'm like, are they going to start spamming us with that? I don't really think that happens, but it's a small item. I was like, we've been talking about FormStack. We've had classes about it. Like we talk, try to get people to use it, and then here someone rolls out Sign Up Genius. But I don't think that's really a one to have big concern about. But that was one that really just kind of sticks out over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's a good one though. I mean, no matter if they're small or what we consider something large, I think that's a perfect example. I think I've given this example on a prior episode, but if I haven't, we were looking for a project management tool and we started doing the evaluation. I think I actually talked about it on the project management episode there, but we did an evaluation. We started talking to different departments and come to find out we already had three project management tools. So people were using different ones. I've seen someone buy a monitor. That was an odd one. They didn't feel like the monitor we gave them was large enough at the time. So they went and bought their own. So that one I think might even be more benign. But basically to your point, it's people basically finding their own solution. So I guess initially, and I don't know how you feel about this, but initially I was like kind of my first reaction to this is to get like really upset and be like, what in the world? This is like our arena. We're the ones managing the technology. You should be asking us. But I haven't always thought about this. And I think it's something that we need to maybe ask ourselves first. And that's why would you say users go outside, to use these tools? Like, why do they go sign up for these things or buy their own monitor? Do you ever ask yourself that?
Yeah, actually, I can think of one that's really something you really don't want. I had a user go buy a laptop, and when I found that out, I was talking to her. I was like, "Why did you get the laptop?" And she's like, "Well, I only have a desktop." And like, she works like in the field a lot and needs to have a laptop. And I was like, sorry, I don't want to say her name, but I was like, if you would have just let us know that you needed this, like, we would 100%. I said, we will go get you a laptop right now. It really kind of hurt my feelings that she felt this is when I first got to the organization, but it really hurt my feelings that she thought that we wouldn't provide the tools that she needs to do her job. And I know it's the flip side, but that's where a lot of people may feel that way, and that's why they do it. But that I don't know. I was really just taken back that she felt so little of us being able to provide her with the equipment that she needs to work that she went out and got her own self a laptop, and that's quite a bit of money for someone to buy.
Yeah, that would be That's definitely a little different, I think, than maybe even though some of the other ones we mentioned. But I still think it points to like kind of the why, right? Do you think there was like, I don't know, there was some sort of, I want to call it like a prior administration to use like kind of a political term, but in the prior administration prior to you getting there, do you think there was something that kind of led to that kind of behavior? Was there, kind of a, an attitude? Did you approach them before or anything like that?
I'm not sure. The one thing I have seen some IT departments do this, and this is really what you don't want to have. I've seen some IT departments where they are kind of like the bottleneck or the gatekeeper of all technology. Like you want a laptop, your manager thinks you should have a laptop, and IT's like, no, we're not doing it, and not really giving justification. Just it's really just kind of like they got the power and they use it like that. I haven't seen that very often, but I've definitely seen that. I don't know if this is what the individual felt. Hopefully that wasn't the case, but I've definitely seen that. There must have been something there.
Yeah. I think we got to be careful, right, as IT folks to not. I don't think many of us have that attitude. Well, I hope. Let's just say I hope no one has this attitude currently that's listening to us. But even if you do, I think that's something you really got to look at, be introspective, and figure out why. Because we really shouldn't be. We shouldn't be power hungry in that way. Just saying like, well, we decide what goes in here or not. One thing I think, and I've learned in the past couple of weeks, I've been having some discussions with different employees about strategy, and one thing that's come up a lot, and I think maybe us as technology professionals aren't as good at, and is communication. I think sometimes we will communicate maybe one time, but not enough, right? And one thing we're terrible at is communicating why. Especially, we talked about this a little bit in some prior episodes, but you got to communicate why someone can't have something. It can't just be, no, you can't have this laptop, which is probably what maybe she was told before, but
Yeah.
it has to be like, no, you can't have this laptop because we need to provide one through the business, or no, you can't have one because this is like some sort of risk that it brings up. Maybe that site you talked about with all the ads, there's potential risk, things like that. But we got to explain the why. And I think something that I've learned, at least in the past few years, and I didn't always think this in my career, is when people are looking for a solution, it's because there's a need for a solution, right? Most of the time, I've had very few people ask me for anything, whether that's hardware, software, or otherwise, that they didn't have a pretty good use case for. Have you had that? I mean, I have had that. And
No, and that's one of the things I really try to tell end users. If there's a business use for it, we're likely to provide it.
yeah,
Hopefully, I don't think anyone feels that way, but you're right about the communications. And one thing I take for granted, and I do this quite often, is I may have had either a conversation with a small group of people or even with the whole company, but it was 3 years ago. Well, that doesn't mean all the people that started after that point know what our stance is on something. So I definitely think communications is a weak point. And the other thing is you got to keep repeating the message.
yeah, I would agree with that. We talk about that with new employees. We can train a new employee on something, but like if we don't train them ever so often, like they're not really getting that reinforcement of it. And that goes for not just like their skills, but also what our policy is on things like was the process for getting some sort of new thing. I think we mentioned on it a little bit, but shadow IT, especially on the software side, but hardware too, really it could be either way. There's some risk associated with it. So I've seen some people go way down the rabbit hole, bring your own device, but there are some risks to that. And like in your mind, what are like the biggest risks for having these unauthorized different applications and or potentially devices in your environment?
Just one of the fundamentals of security is to know what's on your network. And my thing is we IT people, we kind of have the know-how of how to dig into things, but you could have a end user. It's not so much a risk with like iOS devices, but say you got Androids or whatever. They if they jailbreak their phone or something like that, or using some kind of app where it's logging your data or anything like that, or maybe if they bought hardware, if they got it off to somewhere used, and it was loaded with something previously or something like that. There's a lot of ways that can bring risk into your network. The big thing is for us, and this is going beyond that, is the reason we tell people we need to know. One of the reasons we need to know is just so we can look at it from a security aspect, whatever it is. And And I tell them, like, we're not looking to say no, like, we just want to evaluate it and find out the risk up front. And two, we need to find out how we can mitigate it or get rid of the risk if at all possible.
Yeah, to your point, it's not about saying no per se, but it's about applying the right restrictions, applying the rule set, maybe putting it on a network. Got a pretty funny story actually. So we use a cloud-based AP product, and we got an alert. We were looking inside of our cloud, inside the interface there, and we got an alert. And when there was this device, we got a security alert, and when we got an alert inside there, and it was contacted China every 5 minutes. It was reaching out to China. I don't know what it was doing, getting instructions or whatever. And every 5 minutes, boom, 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 boom. We're like, we've been hacked. We for sure thought like someone's plugged in something, and like so we started doing like an investigative. I mean, it really turned into some sort of, I don't know, like a device hunt instead of a manhunt. But we looked at the AP. We knew it had to be in a certain area, and we sent like IT employees, and they were going door to door, to knocking on people's offices, like, "What do you have in your office? Do you have any Android phones? Do you have any like anything that?" People were like, "I don't know." It was funny, and come to find out, it was a picture frame. Someone
Oh,
had a picture
wow.
frame, and they had logged in. It was on our guest network, so it was already like sequestered a little bit there. But it was checking in to see if there's new photos. Basically, is what it was doing, and it was so funny. Like people are so nervous. People are just typing away, and like someone don't on your door. Like, we're here from IT. What have you got in your office? But anyway, but yeah, that was an example of that, right? And a really like benign use case, right? Just want to have a picture of their family. But again, sharing that where we can better protect it, I think is really useful. Is there a is there any like easy ways in your mind to spot shadow IT? Is like something that like tips you off to it, or have you in the past whenever you have noticed it, like what made you notice it? Was it just you kind of happened across it, or
In the early days, it was definitely just we would come across it. We're starting to get tools in place that make us aware. We don't look for it to block it. We just look for it to be aware of it. 9 times out of 10, it's something that they have for work. A lot of times it's where they're working with another organization and that's how they use tools. I wouldn't say there's no easy way. The things that kind of stick out on how we see things lately, and right now it's really just us documenting and knowing that it's on our network is we have a DNS tool, and we were using the Palo Altos for DNS, but we took a stab at DNS filter, and it does a good job of showing applications and stuff that's running. And then another tool that I never really expected to help us with it is Avanon. It's a email filtering tool, email security tool, and it actually has a shadow IT report, and it shows who's using it and what's using it. And I think how it gets it is basically, if you use Dropbox, you're going to get an email. You got to register with your email, and then you get the email. Well, that's what they're reporting on is who's received what emails from what software as service and stuff like that. And I know CrowdStrike has some shadow IT reporting, but for the most part, that's what we're seeing. And definitely just talking with people, and if you got people that don't feel comfortable, if they think you're out to get them, like they're not going to share that information with you saying, "Hey, oh, we were using this tool to do this." And so I really think it's important to make sure you're not going at it with a bat ready to wreck some stuff. You need to be talking to them and being nice and polite about it because they most of the time they legitimately need it. But if you're being real negative or mean to them about using something, then they're never going to report it again.
yeah, I totally agree with that. We've seen some things. I like the email idea. That's a pretty neat one. We've done some looking. I heard about a product at a conference, and we've done some looking into it. Hadn't decided on. We haven't really fully evaluated it, but a product called Keep Aware. If for anyone out there might not have heard of it, basically in a nutshell, it extends the browser and basically gives you control over the browser. And so you can take like Google Chrome or Edge or whatever and make it into an enterprise browser. And then based on their controls, you can basically enforce or just kind of remind people, right? So it knows based on like where people are going, if they're going to chat like OpenAI to do ChatGPT or something like that, it can say our policy is not to allow this AI client. You still want to continue, or you can enforce it. It does that all through like logins and different things like that. Obviously, looking at where they're going online, but it has some pretty cool features as well about Like if you type in like a social security number into the browser anywhere, it'll basically like say, "Hey, this is like PII plus. You sure you want to share this with whatever it is, even before you hit enter or something like that." So some pretty neat things. We're looking into that. Haven't purchased it, so I can't say how well it works or anything, but did hear about that. We've done some stuff, just some blocking of, and really we didn't come at this from a shadow IT perspective. We came at this just from a exfiltration. We did block some of the clients, just the cloud like Dropbox you mentioned, Box, and some of the other Google Drive, some of the other cloud storage ones, and that's mainly just for data exfiltration. Wasn't necessarily for someone not using that, but we have blocked some of those. So I think you mentioned something you said. I think really like we kind of, I don't know, this the title of this episode, Stop Shadow IT with One Easy Trick. A little bit clickbaity, I guess, but you mentioned something and I think you really you hit the nail on the head. The one easy trick really is you got to talk to people. That is the number one thing. How do you like if you talk to people and understand the issues they're having, you're going to understand why they might look for a certain solution, and you're going to if you know their issues, you're going to put solutions in place that take care of those issues. So you talked about that like really two-way discussion that needs to happen between IT and really all users. So in your environment, how do you do that? For the person out there listening that's like been tasked with like doing all this and hasn't really thought about actually having conversations with the users about what they need, like how do you go about that? Do you have like any kind of technique? Do you do that like annually or just ad hoc or what?
I feel like it takes a lot of different types, and not saying we're perfect by no means, but I think a lot of it is just one being approachable. Like if you're not approachable, you're not going to get anywhere. But there's much more to that. One, people may try to get a product because they think you don't have a solution for that. One is just making sure people are knowledgeable of all the solutions that you already have in your environment. And we do like lunch and learns, and we talk about solutions that we have and try to showcase ways that you can use that. I really just think it takes a whole lot communicating in different ways to get that point across. I don't know that there's a one easy button. It's really just communicate, communicate, communicate. My thing.
Yeah, I think I guess definitely from the conversation I've been having, and I would say I encourage all the folks listening. If you're not having those conversations, at least on an annual basis, I would say it's good to have ad hoc conversations, people in the hall, that kind of thing. But I think there's something to be said for just going and meeting someone where they're at, not in a meeting or something like that, or not on the way to a meeting, but just actually going out to where the person works, or maybe even spending time with them in whatever their work area is. Maybe that's the field, maybe that's just at their office out in the district. Spending some time with them, getting them around the table, buy them breakfast. People understand, like, come with open arms, and to your point, be readily approachable, and just ask them. Like I've had some meetings with our front office staff the past few weeks, and I can't meet with every single employee every year. So what I try to do is meet with different groups each year. Like maybe it's the front office, maybe it's our operational staff, maybe it's our administrative staff, that kind of thing, and people at different levels. But basically, going out to them and just saying, "What do we do that works? What do we do that doesn't work? What frustrates you about your job? What things could be better? Is there anything? Do you have any ideas about technology?" I think we put an undue amount of stress on ourselves to be the one that knows every single solution ever possible, right? Like we don't have to know everything. There are a lot of good people in our environment. People hear all kinds of things. They hear news stories. You were talking pre-show. You were sharing with me about a particular story you had heard this week. I'd never heard of it. Now, had I just like gone on my own and been like, I'm the solutions architect. I'm going to figure out what the solution is. That would be a data point that I never had. So don't be afraid to ask people, even people that are not in technology, like what they've heard. Sometimes people in certain areas of your we think about things from an IT perspective. Well, accountants think about things from an accounting perspective, and they go to the conferences about accounting, and they talk about solutions that other accountants use. So maybe they've heard something that you haven't heard about. Are you an accountant? You might not have heard of that. So definitely meet people on their level and just ask them like, what pains you about what you do? And every single person in your environment is going to have that list in their brain. They don't have to come prepared. Like they're going to be able to spat it out right away. And I've heard that these past couple of weeks. And if you ever need a project idea, definitely just ask a user because they can give you about 25 of them right away.
One thing, just to add on to that, I think one thing I try to do well is really just meet all the different types of employees that we have, and just knowing that, we're there for them. IT is customer service, whether you like it or not. And like when it comes to the linemen, like I make sure we issue them iPads, like, but I make sure you have a good DC charger for your truck. You got cables, and I keep like, that stuff. It doesn't cost a whole lot, but just having good charging equipment for them, like they know that they can come to IT if they have something that they need. And when I go into member services, I look at it like, is there any way we could do anything better with IT? Like, is there anything you guys need, to help you do your job? And I think, like you said, just meeting with people, like it definitely helps out. And I try to really I do it with the VPs. Like, is there anything you guys need for, I mean, at least do it annually. Cause I'm like, is there anything you guys need from us for next year's budget and stuff like that? But also try to meet just with the normal employees and just make sure that they have anything that they need. And really, if you're providing good equipment and they know what your rotation is, everyone knows that they're going to get a new iPad or a new laptop or desktop after so many years because we communicate what our rotation is. They really don't ask for a whole lot, and when they do, it's really needed. And then the other part I would say is you got to, for every person that will ask for something, you're going to have two or three that are afraid to ask. And one I talked about on a previous episode, I was out with the stakers with their iPads, and they're with maps out on their iPad, and we were getting them regular iPads. And I looked at it and I was like, "How can you see this? Like, I can't see anything on this map," and because it was bright daylight out. And anyways, we went and it cost money, but we went and got them iPad Pros, and the lit or the nit brightness was twice as much, and it was you could clearly see the screen switching out those iPads. To go from a $400 iPad to a $1,000 iPad is quite a jump, but they're using that for 5 years. Like, so I don't think it's, if you break that down per year, it's not a whole lot to ask. It's for people to do their jobs. And anyways, that's one thing I really try to be good at and spend some time at.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had a mentor, previous boss, doing in my position that I'm in now, and I guess I was always thinking like cost consciousness. Yeah, and I'm not saying go blow money. Some people will have there's different levels of budget and what you're allowed to do and what you're not. But I was always pretty cost conscious. Like, do we really need a third monitor for this person? Do we really need a second monitor for this person? And one thing he told me is he said the cost of whatever that is will be made up in the productivity before you can even think about it. Basically, like if we have that second monitor, it's what, $200, $300. Like if you can get them to do things, if you can get 10 minutes a day of productivity out of that person, then that cost of that monitor is going to be of no consequence in a few months. So I think that's something to think about too. Is a solution that might have a little bit of a cost, can it provide a lot of value? Can it provide productivity savings? Then it really maybe doesn't have as much cost as you think. One thing I know, and kind of goes to the communication thing you mentioned earlier, and it's something that I've in the past few years has been something I've experienced a lot, and that is basically making sure we're involving others in the projects that we do. There are many projects, a lot of projects maybe you think they're an IT only project, but they might not be, obviously, and making sure that everyone is involved. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, what does that have to do with shadow IT, right? That is like actual IT, not shadow IT. But what I will say is when you involve others in your projects, they are very likely to involve you in theirs. And whenever they do need that solution, whenever they do need that, they're going to look at you as like a trusted advisor. And because you were there and you looked at them as a trusted advisor in a particular area. So I know sometimes a lot of life comes back to simple things. The whole golden rule, treat others like you would like to be treated, involve others, they will involve you. And that's really the best trick. Obviously, you want to have some of those things we talked about earlier, those technology things, to monitor things versus block them. I think monitoring is the better solution there so that you can really have a conversation with that person. But yeah, you can have those things, but ultimately having that good relationship with that person so that they're going to actually come to you when they need something is really where it's at. Okay. Well, Anthony, any final words or tips for the listeners with Shadow IT? I think it's a complex problem that maybe has simple answers. Anything, any kind of final words you want to leave them with?
Yeah, just, you know, from a IT perspective, just remember we're there to make all the end users better and more efficient at their job. We're there to be enablers, not disablers, not, you can't do it. And granted, we got to protect our networks and stuff like that. If your default answer is no, like you need to change that. And talk about those little things like the chargers, and you talk about having third monitor and stuff like that. If you look at what even one of your lowest paid people, if you look at what they're paid plus their benefits and stuff like that, what is a $200 or $300 monitor what is that going to cost you versus what you're going to gain out of that person, over the lifetime of that device? I think if you have good customer service, folks aren't going to really go behind your back and try to buy new hardware or buy their own equipment and stuff like that. I've heard definitely at organizations where like engineering is buying equipment because IT won't provide it. You definitely don't want to be in that scenario. So if you got good customer service, you're going to find that you're going to have a lot less shadow IT. I know it's out there. I know it exists, but I think you can make it much worse if you're very restrictive and, your default answer is no to everything.
Yeah, I guess I'll leave everyone with this. I have a thing. I try to encourage disagreement with me because I feel like a lot of leaders, they want to be seen as the one that comes up with the right answer and the right idea. And sometimes I will come up with the best idea, but a lot of times I won't. Maybe most times I won't. So I encourage people to disagree with me. Like, I'm always going to throw out an idea. But one thing I always tell them is you can't just say no. You can say no, but then you have to actually come with a solution on your own. So when we're talking with users, we can't just say no. We have to say no and then come up with a solution to help them with. Otherwise, that they're going to do exactly what you're talking about, and they're going to go behind your back because there is a legitimate business need, and that's why they've even thought about it to begin with. So, all right, well, that's another episode of Off the Wire. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Again, share this with someone if you feel like you got some value out of it. Share it with someone you think could also get some value, maybe a colleague, and help us grow. Some awesome ideas coming up. We got some things in the hopper, some really big plans. So stay tuned with that. And until next time, this is Off the Wire.